KT writes in, recently I found myself struggling with the language we use when we talk about protests and other forms of activism. Specifically, why the narrative of rioting equals bad, violence, Nazi punching, equals bad, flattens a complex issue. Nonviolent activism is always touted as the only acceptable form of resistance. While I do not think violence is good, I find this black and white view of the matter to be unrealistic, as history has proven. When I try to broach the subject, I come off as supporting acts that hurt innocent people and being an insensitive, bad liberal. This lets me know I've done a terrible job explaining myself. I've heard you touch on the subject a few times more broadly on the show, and you always do a good job. Thank you, Katie. Would you be willing to speak to the language that can be used to discuss this subject in a nuanced and productive manner?
Wow.
I find
that's a heck of a question.
It's a great question. I find that, and I like the question because it moves beyond, like KT is acknowledging, I know that it's unrealistic historically to say violence equals bad. How do I communicate this?
Yeah.
So I find that you sort of touched on this already, where it's like using history as your example is really powerful.
Sure.
So the civil rights movement was not just comprised of nonviolent activists.
No.
There was also the whole time a very militant wing that was like, oh, we will use violence to defend ourselves. That's who Malcolm X was.
Yeah.
You know, that's who the students who were organizing in the South were nonviolent, but they were staying with families that did have guns and would defend themselves when the KKK strolled by.
Of course.
Strolled by. Invaded like a terrorist organization, because that's what they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they meant to harm and possibly kill black people.
Yeah.
And the black families were like, listen, this nonviolent stuff is great for you guys, but the reality of our day-to-day lives in the South is we have to defend our lives.
Guns were very central to the Black liberation movement.
Yeah, and I promote this book every time we talk about this. But
I was gonna say.
Yeah, this nonviolent stuff will get you killed. It's
Incredible
a great book and so important because the central thesis of that book is that violence played a central role.
Yeah.
In the civil rights movement, a necessary role. So, and like Martin Luther King Jr. was aware of this, and like, but we never teach it in schools. We teach we teach little kids that Martin Luther King Jr. was basically like a doormat.
Well, I think so. This is what I was going to say. I think a really important framing device is to remember that nonviolent action and protest is a tactic.
Right.
It was not that the people involved in it were. It's a tactic. They chose that because of the optics of it.
Right.
A lot of the time.
Right. Because if they were perceived as like angry, violent black people, the government would have destroyed them.
Yeah, they would have used that as just cause to retaliate harder.
Yes. So they were like, we have to present ourselves as being this righteous, godly cause.
Yeah.
Which is like, I am a vessel for the shining light of justice.
Yeah.
Like egalitarianism. So that's who like Martin Luther King Jr. had to present himself as.
Yeah.
Malcolm X was like, cool.
Yeah,
also, we're being occupied by a hostile military force. And we should be able to defend ourselves.
Yep.
And those two ideologies were central to the civil rights movement.
Yep.
And also to most social movements, I would say.
Yeah.
Like the suffragettes. I mean, there were women who were like throwing Molotov cocktails.
Yeah.
The LGBT movement, ACT UP, very radical direct action movements.
Yeah.
So I think almost every social justice movement that you could study had a radical element to it. And it's not only important, it's necessary. Because if you just have a movement comprised of nonviolent actions,
Yeah.
you're not threatening the establishment.
Sure.
And that's the only way to affect change.
Yep.
Is how I feel about it.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I would also say KT. I had this really funny thought a second ago that I hope her name is not Katie.
So I thought about that, but then I'm like, wouldn't they have just written Katie?
No, I've known a lot of Katies that go by KT.
KT?
Yeah. But there's a part
So
of me that
either
hopes her name is not
Katie or KT.
Yeah. I hope her name is not Katie. I hope it's just a weird coincidence that those are her initials. But I also would say I don't think you are as alone in those thoughts as you think you are.
No, certainly not.
I don't think that section of the left that thinks that any sort of action that's not nonviolent is bad is as big as you think it is. You may be encountering a lot of those people, but
Sorry, Desi
hello.
looked at Eric like he was about to give you the business. Like, hey, why aren't we hanging out? What the fuck, man? You talking about direct action? It's my
buddy.
jam.
Yeah, I could see Desi laying down some streets.
Desi protests every day for more
Yeah.
food.
Yeah, I would say I think this is a big conversation, and it's not as I would say it's not as that section of like Nazi punching is bad. I think that's a very big conversation.
I was going to say also, the people who are probably lecturing you about violence are not going to be swayed by you being like, but Malcolm X. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They'll probably be like, right, Malcolm X was a domestic terrorist too. Because
Right.
there are a lot of people who believe that about Malcolm X.
Mhm.
They don't view him as a civil rights hero. They think he was a domestic terrorist.
Yeah.
So, which
I
is
also-
obviously absurd.
This might be unfair. I feel like a lot of people I've seen lecturing about violent action are also not the people who are willing to do the nonviolent stuff, like
Yes.
put themselves in front of
Yeah.
police officers and lay down on the streets and
it's
stuff.
a distraction because they believe it's all invalid.
Yeah.
So they go after the most like fringe example they can find to be like, see, this is really dangerous, or
Right.
yeah. And a lot of leftists play into that by saying, therefore, we shouldn't have that element because it discredits the whole movement.
Yeah.
Which again is, he'll totally drink your water. By the way, you should guard that.
Hello.
Sorry, Desi loves to drink people's water. It's ridiculous because it's like these people these naysayers will dismiss the movement no matter what. So you can't start to dictate terms based on people who are going to hate you and dismiss you regardless.
Yep.
Like imagine if Martin Luther King Jr. had been like, well, listen, people are really saying like the counter protests
Right.
are too far.
Yeah.
Or the bus boycott is really disruptive. So maybe we shouldn't do that.
Right.
You know, like obviously you don't listen to the people who are saying you don't deserve equal rights.
Right.
Why would you listen to them?
I think you guys have brought this up on the show before. I think you've mentioned this in these types of conversations because this is a conversation that comes up from time to time. But I also think it's really important to remember that in terms of terms,
Perfect.
a really common talking point is they're like, Richard Spitzer wasn't doing anything and just got punched in the head senselessly. And what they're saying is, remember that the things that Richard Spencer advocates for are violent.
Right.
And they're like, yeah, all he was doing was giving an interview about how he wants an ethno state and he wants to violently remove all minorities from the country. It's like, yeah, those are all violent shit, and he
Right.
deserves to get punched in the head for it. Like,
Right. I was
it's
picturing
just
like an ASPCA commercial, but for like Richard Spencer.
Right.
Won't you consider
yeah,
the Nazi, the poor defenseless Nazi,
right, yeah,
who was just talking about being a Nazi,
yeah.
and turning the United States into a bunch of Nazis. When suddenly, an evil black bloc
Right.
protester punched him in the face for no reason.
Yeah, it's
Like,
an
what?
That's part of the framing. Is like, yeah, the things he advocates for are violent, and it's just meeting violence with violence,
Yeah, and you're not going to
and it's defense.
enthusiastically debate or convince a white supremacist
No.
into changing their opinion. The
Absolutely
only thing fascists understand is being violently confronted
Yeah.
and defeated.
Yeah.
History teaches us that.
Yep.
There was no talking the Nazis out of anything.
No.
It was happening.
Yep.
So you either say people have the right to defend themselves against it, or you support Nazis.
Yeah.
And it's really that clear cut.
Right.
People try to complicate it in all types of different ways. Is it really fair to punch Richard Spencer? Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things that's like, yeah, he has a right to say whatever he wants to. But people are very unaware of the like, yeah, it's all just speech until it becomes action. And at the point it becomes action, it's too late.
But like, imagine talking to people like Jewish people who were in the concentration camps or your grandparents who participated in defeating the Nazis and being
Yeah.
like, do you feel like you guys went too far?
Right.
Do you feel like you were too hard on the Nazis?
Right,
They would
right.
look at you like you were out of your mind.
Yeah.
And like rightfully so. It was
Right.
like, no, this was a force that could only be defeated.
Right.
And if we tried to compromise with them, as many countries tried to, history has taught us it only aided in assisting them
Yep.
and enabling them.
Yep.
So, there's no compromise here.
No.
You can't have a little bit of Nazism and white supremacy. I mean,
Right.
we've had white supremacy. It's the foundation of the United States, right? But what I mean to say is you can't let Richard Spencer have some of what he wants.
No, absolutely not.
Right.
I hope he's afraid to leave his house forever.
Yeah. But
That's what I want.
Fascists should always be afraid to come into public and spout their hatred and
Yeah.
nonsense. Always. They should always be afraid, like, is the Black Bloc going to be here?
Yeah.
Am I safe? Like, of course. I want fascists to always feel like they don't have a safe space
Yeah.
in the United States.
Great.
I would be totally fine with that.
Perfect.
Yeah.